This paper is called Those Things We Used to Call Galleries, How Art's Reputational Value Vaporises the Public. Will you tell me the story again about those places you used to go to called galleries? Where were they, and what did you do in them?
I've told you this many times. Maybe you will become what we used to call an anthropologist, the kind of magician who makes up stories about how our ancestors used to live. They're cancelled nowadays.
I might have liked that.
I used to spend a lot of time in galleries, but we don't need them anymore. Now I just go to the community centre. They were where I used to go with my friends to see objects that we called contemporary art. Some of it was hung on the walls, some of it stood on the floor. Sometimes we could even walk into them and meet people, like a kitchen. Most of these things were worth lots of money, and we had our favourites. We used to argue so much about what these objects meant to us and which one talked to us in the best way.
Did they talk?
No, not really. Although some of them talked in the way that things talk in your head. But we said they talked. We argued about what they talked about and whether they were right or whether they were wrong.
Where were these galleries?
Well, there were lots of them everywhere. Almost most of them, though, were in places where the rich people lived.
And why was that?
Because they needed money from the rich people. Some of them were given money by a thing we used to call the government in order to make people better, make people behave better. But really this was a trick. It was a trick to stop us doing other things that the government didn't want us to do, and it was a trick to make the objects more valuable for the rich people that owned them, that loaned them, or gave them to the gallery to enhance their reputation.
What?
I know, it doesn't work like that anymore. People used to believe that the more people looked at and argued about an object, the more valuable the object would become, so it would make people richer.
Did the people who made the objects get richer?
A few did, but most didn't at all. But people thought there was always a chance.
Reputation sounds a bit stupid.
But it still exists. It's just that it doesn't rely on people going to physical places anymore. Rich people still buy art. They usually store it in very big warehouses with lots of security. It's just that they don't need us anymore in order to make what's in store valuable for rich people. The value is still made by reputation, but the reputation is made in the flicker behind their eyes.
Thank you, Justin. So thanks, Mick, for opening up in such a generous way. This is an ungenerous presentation. Apologies. Fuck off. That's what happens when you ask your partner to get involved in your presentation. Right. Alter empire in its fiscal value communication, but deeply embedded in the repeating and doubling forms of inequality that empire still sublates, art's reputation becomes not split in a double bind as those 20th century peddlers of postmodernism like to think, but non-apparetic, a scene of pure measurement. Since the early noughties, a great deal of academic, economic and market-based analysis, some of which Mick has referred to, has proved that the floating of art's value, rather than being based on its public reputation, is measured through pure trade. This short paper will suggest somewhat schematically, and because it is rehearsing the conclusion, about more than the conclusion actually, of a book that I'm writing that refuses to get to its conclusion, that because of the inane mechanization of digital value that underwrites our current fictions, those fictions in which we believe that we might have something to do with art's value, we must think again and reorganize the modes through which we locate, act, come together, support each other, using some of the mechanisms and tactics that some often minoritarian communities, including in the arts, but not only, have rehearsed in the late 20th and early 20th century. The art world's reputation in the digital age can be broken down. First of all, we have the problem with this thing called art world. This is not a directly digital problem, but it needs laying out as precursor due to the title of the day. There isn't an art world, nor even what the ethically minded distributionist, learning from the global, call art worlds. What is referred to as the art world by a conglomerate of people, including those of us with skin in the game at all scales, is simply the naming of an enclosure within which we sit here, hoping that we might be pissing out, as it were, rather than having piss land on us in here. This art world is a concoction that has developed primarily through the socio-economic models of power driven through post-guild market forces and sites of privilege since the Enlightenment in Anglo-European culture, but particularly from the mid-19th century, in order to retain a relationship between authorship, reputation, and money. This art world, through its inventive reputational indexing and theatrically staged perversion of first world aesthetic values, also enables the forms of political innocence associated with the conventions held up by its actors and attendant publics: appreciation, intelligence, alterity, disruption, continues to mask the modes through which it placates the fact that its financial instruments are embroiled in the legacies of chattel slavery and the continuities of colonialism. This placatory mechanism works through all forms of money power, as Catherine Hall's archival research testifies. But in art, an exquisite form of reputation occurs through the naming and displaying of self-critique. Perhaps most pertinent to the subject of today, this art world maintains a fiction that has been on hand to enable the steady move from physical to digital and back again when it suits the movements of financialization. If we make a rash and under-researched statement like, the digital started when Nixon decoupled the dollar from gold in 1972, that's a kind of misquote of Thomas Piketty. And what are these movements in plain terms? Since May and Moses in the May-Moses Index demonstrated with glee the way in which the value, fiscal, of an art object moved on the market in a similar way to any other derivative and affected the value, reputational, of its standing by way of loans and gifts in the public realm, more and more economic research, including the Deloitte report that Mick referred to, particularly that done by dealers and auction houses working with economic masters of the universe lodged on high salaries in universities in the global north, have maintained that if an artwork, say a Richter, owned by a collector, say Abramovich, is displayed in a publicly funded museum, say Tate Modern, the combination of its publicness and its private worth will at least quadruple. In fact, there is an index which many might be familiar with called ArtNet that correlates value and reputation according to both auction house sales, because nobody, as Mick said, can correlate private sales in any reality whatsoever. And if anybody tells you they are, then they are purely guessing. Except for the dealers in the room, that is. Where was I? As I write, the turnover of Richter is 27 million. That's 27 million pounds, dollars actually in this instance, because it's from Moses May, per year is made by floating or by owning a particular Richter. Although due to the high paywall, these will not be exact current figures. I refuse to pay ArtNet paywall. This is an interesting side fact, since when Suhail Malik and I were doing a big research project on the art market in the 2010s, Richter was far higher in ranking. Fashion is currently playing a role in pushing the prices of African American artists particularly, and particularly male African American artists up the ranking. I'm happy that a few more black people are getting hold of a bit of the money, because of course most of the money goes to the dealers, although they still have to play the same games. And I'm deeply cynical about how this illustrates the fragility of any fiscal reputational value out with the vagaries of market whims. Let's see how Trump's eradication of EDI works alongside this current fashion. Whilst this might lead one to assume that the desire of curators and such tastemakers does affect the reputational value of artists, my point is that any correlation does not equal public display. There is still a huge amount of snobbery between the primary and the secondary market. So the primary market is the dealer's market and the secondary market is the auction houses. Historically, this has literally been to do with what we might understand as the personal touch. Rather than dealing with an auctioneer on the secondary market, if you buy from a dealer, you get the personal and, importantly for the art washer's understanding, touch. Which is what Mick was referring to when he said you can't walk into any private gallery and say, I want the yellow one. But these things are changing. Whilst across the end of 2024 and during the beginning of 2025, auction houses and anecdotally dealers, so both the primary and the secondary market, are experiencing downturns in the circulation of sales, the auction house now makes more money via online and telephone bidding than it does from people in the actual room. If you have never been or watched an auction house sale, I would recommend it. It's free. It's a spectacle, although attendance can be intimidating. You kind of need to pass up, I guess, for most of us in this room. What is interesting is that, I don't want to make any... What is interesting is that whilst it has always been a performance, with the auctioneer as ringmaster, it is now the personalities and looks... whilst it's always been a performance with the auctioneer as the ringmaster, it is now the personalities and looks, particularly good looks, of the consigliere who become the objects of desire as they joke and whisper to their clients or their clients' bots on the end of the line, the digital line. Witness the increase in proliferation of and importance of art fairs and their corollary aesthetic social experience. Whilst many fairs make a great deal out of their availability to the public to view and experience, of course at a very high cost, indeed the finances of Frieze Art Fair in London would not add up without those ticket sales. In the current model, Frieze and its equivalent art fairs wouldn't be able to open the doors without the money that comes in from the very 60 quid or however much they charge, 60 euros in this context, for the tickets to get in for the dirty public. I'm informed by a few dealers who already struggle to scrape together the costs of a booth, very expensive, as I'm sure people in this room know, that there is a strong resentment within the market about the public viewing days. Dealers don't want to waste their time talking to the public about the art that they have on display. They want buyers, not people who no longer have the capacity to enhance reputation. Another aside, this gives the lie to current UK government policy on the GDP contribution from the cultural industries, wherein data is based on, for example, the number of people who visit art galleries. That's simply not GDP. Or it doesn't add up to GDP. Where once, like Bridgerton, the fair was part of the season, and driven by paps of beautiful ordinary people standing alongside rock stars like Jay Joplin. Nowadays, he doesn't turn up in public, and the champagne is only free for the old clients. Nobody new buys at art markets anymore, except through pre-sale that is then performatively rearranged and restaged for the press at the fair. These anecdotes serve to highlight the ways in which the digital economy increases the lack of reliance of the art world on what we might call, in an old-fashioned sense, real-world appearance. To rashly decontextualize Foucault, this is the new naturalness of wealth. The performance of value is purely digitized. It affects what gets seen and displayed in what we still laughingly call public galleries. But that stuff on display, that artwork, must be worth enough to be circulated through the prohibitively expensive old-fashioned routes of air and sea. And who would do that if the reputational value of publicness is only an adjunct to wealth? Far better to keep it in the vaults, in a special economic zone or a free trade port. Actually, most free trade ports are special economic zones where tax is loose and things get washed. Usually somewhere within an art fair attached for quasi-public cleaning of money, like Miami, for example, or Teesside. It's got a new economic zone and it's got a new port, but those of us at Northumbria University aren't, hoping that there's suddenly going to be lots of money washing around in the northeast. This is where it makes its value both fiscal and reputational, in these places, in these vaults. There is no need for the public to see it on display in a large, expensive, drafty gallery space where employers are moaning about their rights for a fair wage and the barista gets paid more money than the interns. It's also a nod to Gregory Chalet. Digital reputational value grows at the expense of all except for UHNWIs, ultra-high net worth individuals. I had to keep remembering what that was. Those artists they collect, and if lucky, some of those doing the dealing. Back in the real world, many friends are struggling to maintain and fund galleries and art spaces with diminishing public funding. My question is, rather than changing the nature of the content that is displayed in public in these places, whilst applying for grants and talking to benevolent donors about gifts and loans, is not the whole structure the thing that we need to explode? If what I'm imagining here, with a certain amount of experience, is anything close to the truth of our immediate future, then our task is simply Sisyphean unless we recognise the reputation and value have floated off into private space in digital realms that only take up physical space and vast footprint in Greenland. I once conducted an exercise with a group of people where the task was to reimagine the spaces and facilities of Tate Modern as a social housing resource, a bit like Albert Meister's underground Boberg. I've been researching the history of autogestion or self-management, and maybe there will be some links there with the management theories that Mick has been reading. So I've been doing this for some time, and think that our community can learn, and I'm talking about the fictional community of the art world that is represented in this room. Maybe that there are things that our community can learn from lessons from the fantastic imaginative and community experiments that autogestion, led mainly by Henri Lefebvre and some latter-day situationists, developed in the 1960s. We must work against reputation, whether digital or physically contrived. We must change the infrastructure within which, if we want to continue, we treat people, have conversations on and around, meet, find friendship and comradeship outside of the structure that used to be provided, outside that structure that used to be provided for a very privileged few of us by the public galleries. Here we might meet many partners in solidarity, sexuality, economy. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. The organisation of social, political and ecological degrowth communities has existed as a practice even in the rich world for centuries, a humble and intelligent inheritance that we cannot afford to ignore, specifically within the way that we trade art. But it means that the reputational value of some images and objects will no longer be of more worth than others. The alleged original dream of the digital, apparently. This is not quite a bloody Luddite rant. However, I'd like to be able to talk to someone about the images flickering behind my eyes. What is it that we can learn from other communities, both local and global, that understands a crafted thing as a means for exchange that is social, political and pleasurable? Those things those council people called anthropologists used to look at. What of those many communities of practice increasingly parasited by art's global players in the name of creative curatorial invention? I am deeply saddened, for example, by the perceived failure of Ruin Grouper at the last Documenta for having been placed in an inextricable position, agreeing to be put on display under the terms of reputational value, non-digital, and having been unbearably castigated for principles of Lumbung, the very affordance of the new so desired by the reputational. It is a quintessential exemplification of what I'm talking about. Cross-platform, collective, transversal attempts to open up a field of practice in which lack of perfection and ambivalence of public display was greeted with deep displeasure and political antipathy by those people lucky enough to have the money and the means to attend. More so, I am angry about the reputational, ungenerous, cruel methodology of invitation, so unlike what was deserved, so redolent of the cultural blindness that reputation endows. The problem is not the digital is just another tool. The problem is the reputational. Thank you.
The thing that struck me, there were a lot of things written down here, but it's something you talked about as well in an article of yours many years ago in Residence, yeah? About this kind of narrative of the pricelessness of art, yeah? And the kind of mythology of the romantic artist and all of this stuff, and how that serves, yeah, to maintain the value of art in the market, you know, that it relies on that. And there's a lot of criticism of that mythology, and for good reason. But I wonder what happens without that, because you were kind of mentioned as well the Enlightenment and the emergence of post-guild, you know, the autonomous artist, the artist genius, and these kind of these ideas that came out. And of course, this was deeply linked to the emergence of middle-class markets for art and all of these things. So of course, the market and this non-market romantic ideology are deeply linked. But that kind of sullies it a bit, but it also serves a purpose for the rest of the people in the art world and for artists themselves. It does represent a freedom from one of the only fields that is somewhat free. If you were most artists don't make money, you know, and aren't really in it for the money, they shouldn't be, because they probably won't get it. So if you kind of do away with that pricelessness, with that romantic mythology, that scares me, that worries me, that idea.
That's good. That's very good. That means that some of it had an effect. I think it's an absolute problem, the idea that the artist... I mean, first of all, I would thoroughly dispute your idea that it enables some form of freedom. I don't recognise that as freedom. I recognise that as playing a naive game, talking about the use of naive earlier on. I don't think that we should, as somebody who's taught artists for over 30 years. I think the kind of ways in which educational structure delivers artists into the not market, you're absolutely right. I mean, Cholette's got good figures on, you know, the percentage of people that actually make any money whatsoever, and I refer quite a lot to that in that paper. I don't believe that those figures that are currently trained to be and act as artists who, as Mick said, are under a rock waiting to be picked up and found. Okay, I think that we are, how to say this, we need to implode that structure. It doesn't make me frightened, it makes me excited by the idea that I tried to encompass it very shortly at the end of that paper, that instead of applying all that intelligence, whatever you want to call it, and I don't believe those people we currently call artists don't have intelligence. I think they do have intelligence, but it's a very equivalent intelligence. People have intelligence in many, many fields. I think one of the problems we have at the moment is we've set ourselves up in this precipitous way where value develops as through this concept that I'm trying to disavow of reputation. Value sets up a hierarchy, which you referred to in your introductory remarks, and I think the hierarchy is bound to fail. I think that most of the people that you have talking at this event today believe roughly the same thing, which is that whilst we maintain this facade of reputational value being considered as a mechanism through which an artist will grow into the light, and that's financial light as well as visibility. As long as we maintain that as a fiction, as long as we call these places galleries and mainly ask people to come in and quietly look at things on the wall or on the floor, we're not going to create any forms of equal distribution. We are not going to make any inroad into the absolute wealth inequalities. They are in the art field as well as its proximate fields, and that's what we need to do now. I am very, very bored of going to exhibitions where artists tell me about poverty.
Look, well, I would agree that it's the reputational system that, like you're saying, that has to be exploded, and
well, no. I think the reputation, I think Mick talked about this very well. Reputation is a mechanism, yeah? It's a mechanism that can be utilised. Some people are very good at manipulating it for themselves, or other people manipulate it for them. And this very basic structure of the secondary, primary and secondary market is full of these ridiculous flaws, like enabling artists to sit and dream while somebody else does the money work. I mean, it's just ridiculous. I mean, who the fuck do artists think they are? You know? It's like, why don't you take some bloody responsibility? And of course we know that most working artists have to take that and many other responsibilities as well. Maybe when you become Richter, you can afford to sit and, paint glass windows in a church.
Maybe we won't say the reputational, but say the reputational as it is instrumentalised by the market, yeah? And the market has control over that reputational system, yeah? What if, for example, the value of the art market collapsed, yeah? And all the value went out, and all those people lost all their money and their investments, yeah? And nobody wants to invest in art anymore, yeah? Mm-hmm. You could still maintain some of the aspects of the romantic notion of the artist, because I think that it offers an alternative, perhaps one of the only alternatives to just the everyday instrumental of normal working life. you know, that you work to make money and you do this, you know, it's an alternative, and it's that alternative that draws, to my mind, that draws artists in, and then they get sucked into but I need to get reputation because otherwise I feel bad about myself, and I need to make sales because I need to pay the rent. All that stuff, yeah, not so great, but this romantic idea, because it comes under attack, I'm not saying it's not problematic, and I'm not saying it's not kind of essential to the kind of market thing, but I'm just a little bit nervous about, I know that Mick would probably agree with you, I know Gregory Gillette would certainly agree with you, and probably Bill DeRissowitz would probably agree with you, but I'm a bit nervous about trying it.
Sure, it's really frightening, okay? Because we're structured around it. I mean, it's our community, it's our life, it's the words that come out of our mouths, we are structured into this value system. We have to, we need to do a job on ourselves to unwork it, to become different kinds of workers. I would counter a few things that I would argue with about what you've just said, but anyway, I will counter this one. I would counter primarily by saying that I see no reason why artists should be given the right to imaginative material freedom, and I'm not talking about material as in money, I'm talking about material as in being able to do things in this place we currently call a studio or on a site or whatever, whilst other people deliver the post and make the milk bottles. Do you know what I mean? Nobody makes milk bottles anymore, do they?
It's been digitised.
Digitise the milk. Yeah, exactly. I mean, why? Why? What right is that?
It's an opportunity that we have now that didn't always exist, and most of the people who take that opportunity suffer for it. They suffer financially.
Oh, I think you're just falling into a trap of romanticism.
I know.
Sorry.
I don't know why I asked.
I've only just met you.
I knew you would say that, so okay.
I mean, fundamentally, I believe that, I don't believe in anything. I fundamentally know, because I work alongside them, that the artists that I work alongside, and they're quite a specific bunch, and it's pretty hardcore because they have to have dinner with me. But it's that they don't take any shit. They have brilliant political imaginations, but they don't think that their political imaginations and the actions that imagination makes them do on certain materials is any more productive or any more liberating or any more free than anybody else. And the structures of education and the structures of reputation that evolve through that education and beyond it into the remnants of the public domain that we still have, which, as you know from my paper, I'm suggesting isn't going to last very much longer. That they don't consider what they do to be any more valuable or special than any other worker.
Yeah, they say that.
Yeah, but
I agree, and there's a equivalence to high-low culture, but I'm not sure that's really...
Well, yeah, okay, there are egotistical twats in every single field, aren't there? But, you don't have to be one of them.
But it's a bit... it's a bit extreme.
I wasn't directly aimed at you. That was all of you.
We're all talking.
Anyway, I'll leave that.
Ask a question.
Moving on. Thanks, Andrea. I just thought maybe with a comment on digital reputation. I think the most interesting thing I heard on digital reputation on Instagram was when Ivanka Trump, during Trump's first presidency, was posting pictures of her beautiful apartment and her art collection. And Richard Prince, who had some works on the wall there, and said, "Ooh, she's got Richard Prince."
Yeah.
And he disavowed the works, returned the money, and said that they were fake, even though he had sold them to her through his gallery, and said they were fake and that she had to take them down. Because his reputation was damaged by the fact that, his associations with the Trump family were being uncovered in a public forum, and he didn't like it.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. But moving on to your...
Well, I've met Richard Prince, and I can tell you, he's a macho bastard. But you know, and I think his work sucks, and I think, you know, he may as well just draw a big penis on a piece of paper.
It's responsible.
But on the kind of more substantive point.
Yeah. Qui-moi? Yes.
Thank you for, I'm very much, you know, kind of on page with you and kind of cancelling the art world. But are we not replacing one methodology, which is the methodology of the art world, you know, the genius, that you know, if we stick it long enough, maybe we will make money, someone has to win, it's a bit like the lottery. With the other one, which is the situationist one, which again, I empathise with a lot, which is that we should suppress art, we should cancel art, and then everything becomes art, and that's a wonderful utopian ideal. But at the same time, it's also a mythology. You know, the failure of the situationists was nothing ever got realised. They had lots of great ideas and lots of great plans.
Yeah.
And it was also the point of them, I understand.
Yes, it was.
But what do we do in between? Because, you know, as Tommie says, we do have an art world. We're all in some way engaged in that. What's the in-between step that we move from the art world that we have now, which is the art world of big rich people who do shadowy deals in the background, and then the art world at most people's level, which is, you know, artists really trying to make a break, make some work, appreciate it, and so forth. So what's the in-between? Are we kind of swapping one mythology for another? Neither of them really kind of achievable. So.
Yeah, I'm with you that the situation. I mean, I could talk for a long time about autogestion, the concept of self-management, which I think is really interesting and has a very important political history that somebody like Henri Lefebvre takes back to medieval social and economic arrangements, as in household arrangements, but we won't go into that here. I think it's very practical, actually. I have a very pragmatic vision of it, which is why I put in that short anecdote about working with a group of people. It was at HKW in Berlin, actually. It was a housing conference in an art gallery. I wasn't quite convinced by that, but when I did the exercise about how you could use Tate Modern literally, and so the moment, you know, one of the many moments at which the housing crisis was high on the agenda across Europe and particularly in the UK, how you could use, and particularly in London, how you might use Tate Modern, because it has loads of loos, lots of water coming in at different points. It has about 8 kitchens. You know, it's viable that it could be used to house homeless people, okay? And I thought that would be a very good use of a public resource. And I think I know lots of artists who will be interested in helping to facilitate that, yeah? And, you know, doing it with the pleasure that artists get and give as well. So I think I don't know whether you caught the way that I did mention pleasure as being one viable outcome of this new community that I am building very slowly and on my own. I think that there is a great deal of work that many artists do that is small scale, is often local. I mean, you know, there are probably people in this room that do this kind of thing, and I absolutely value their contribution much more. I want to jump to Documenta and my anger at the way that, I mean, obviously there were lots and lots of reasons that the Ruben Grupa Documenta was seen to fail, or was made to fail, or was staged to fail, one of which is to do with its proposed anti-Semitism, which is the one that got most of the headlines. But it was also because of the very things that Mick was talking about. They were trying to trade, and they were trying to trade by cutting out the middleman, which is the one that in the conventional art market gets most of the money, which is gets 50% of the money, it's the dealer. Yeah. And so that, you see, I think that if we'd have taken some of the lung bung activities seriously, we could have just taken over the Friedrichsianum and used it properly as the people that were in there that were representing different fields of cultural research and doing could have easily continued. And it would have been transformative. I am thinking incredibly pragmatically. They wanted to sleep and cook in the Friedrichsianum. What a great idea. And it's not insurmountable to imagine it. So I'm talking at the practical end of autogestion, not the kind of theoretical. Well, I am talking theoretically, but, you know, I'm thinking practically. I'm thinking incredibly practically. So I can see steps. I mean, there's an exhibition downstairs at the moment, okay? It's curated by somebody, it's named by somebody, that person might be in the room, you know, that's all great. But, you know, what about just saying Temple Bar Gallery is like open to anybody who wants to do anything in here, you know, and we'll take it seriously and we'll value it and we'll, you know. The first thing I did, I'm going to have to end here because I know that we're way past time. The first thing I did when I became the Baltic professor at Northumbria is talking to the director of the Baltic. I said, "Sure, what do you think we should do?" And I said, "I think you should dedicate a whole floor of the Baltic." I don't know whether everybody's been there, but it's massive and it's got very big floor space. A whole floor to Sunday painters. And just leave it for Sunday painters, and they can display it. Just give it to them. I met this whole bunch of really interesting small groups of people that have come together because they like painting, and they don't have anywhere to display it. And, you know, in art market terms, it might not be judged very well, although, you know, that could be arguable. And that's what we should use these places for. And it's pragmatic. It's bloody cheaper as well, you know? I mean, just saying. I mean, it's not rocket science what I'm talking about. It's kind of pragmatic. Anyway, come to my side, everybody.
To the dark side.
To the light side.